And I have to ask, what in the world has happened to the Republicans? I don't know if you saw this, but recently, I believe it was over the past weekend, Mike Huckabee, Newt Gingrich, and another, I don't think it was McConnell, but another Republican leader gave a series of speeches at a church in Virginia. And Gingrich was quoted as saying that the problem with America now is that we're surrounded by pagans. Now, have you heard this report?
I have not, but...
This is something out of Grand Theft Jesus. I mean, Bob, where is the leadership? I've even read some Democrats say, we're not gleeful about what is happening with the Republicans. We're a little bit scared because the country may turn into a one-party system. The Republicans have just abdicated any role of reason, intellectual ability. What's happening with this party?
Well, I do think it is directly related to what I talk about in Grand Theft Jesus, because actually I think what happened, and I'm considering doing another book on this. It depends on a variety of things, including whether a publisher is interested, but kind of very briefly trying to explain the road to ruin, how we got here. And some of that starts with what I was talking about a few minutes ago of Johnson and Nixon undermining confidence in government and opening up the possibilities. But from the late 1970s, and particularly Reagan coming in, there was a rebirth of the sort of totally free market economics that had been discredited by the Depression and had remained discredited ever since, and putting that back into effect. But in order to be able to do that, there were two halves to this Republican coalition that succeeded. And those marketists, which is what I call them, sort of as a way of comparing Marxists to marketists, people believe totally in the unfettered free market, were able to gain power by forming this coalition with the religious right. And they really have very little in common. In fact, from the perspective of the Christian conservatives, these marketist people aren't simply not on their side, they are on the other side. They are promoting hedonism in order to sell stuff and that sort of thing. So it's this very uneasy alliance, but it enabled them to get elected. But what it also did was to create this culture war that we've been hearing so much about in recent decades. And that culture war, I think, took the eye of the public off the economic war that was going on, in which the middle class was being undermined, in which the very rich were getting richer and richer and richer, in which deregulation was going on. The people instead were focused, not simply the religious right people, focused on issues of abortion and gay rights and all these sorts of things, but the more liberal people as well, who on economic issues, those two groups might well have been in alliance together. The people on the left were also focused on this culture war, and they're fighting each other there, while the free market advocates are tearing down regulation and tearing down, ultimately, the economy.
I would argue with you, though, and this is coming from my libertarian leanings, that we really never had a free market in place. To me, it resembled a cronyism capitalism. It was government in bed with big business. And if that makes me sound like a populist, then so be it. But, the free market to me, Bob, is, like me, Jack Criss in Profiles, Mississippi. I don't want government favors. I'd like to be left alone to do my business. I would love a little bit smaller tax bracket. I think I never really saw the free market in action. Even Reagan, who gave a lot of lip service to it, didn't practice laissez-faire capitalism. So I would not be quite as apt to put the blame on, the free market. I don't think the free market ever existed.
Well, ever existed is a good way to put it, because even in the late 19th century, the laissez-faire advocates were supposedly opposed to the government doing anything, yet their number one objective was a high tariff to keep any sort of competitors from coming into the country.
They run to the government for help.
They run to the government to railroad builders, getting these huge land grants to build railroads, all sorts of things. They'd run to the government to get injunctions, to break strikes. And so basically, and Michael Harrington, the author of The Other America, famously said, what these people want is socialism for the rich and free enterprise for the poor, and that's what we've tended to have.
Well, and I think C. Wright Mills got it right when he talked about the power elite. And I'm I'm sure he was talking about the military and the big business, the Wall Street types, and they are the ones, I think, that got us into this mess with the government's complicity. I mean, that's my argument. I'll give you an example. There's a man named John Allison who was CEO of BB&T, a prominent East Coast bank based in Charlotte, North Carolina. John Allison was also a very prominent advocate of Ayn Rand's philosophy, a huge contributor to the Ayn Rand Institute think tank, and yet when the bailout money came, Mr. Allison lined up and took $3.5 billion some odd dollars. He didn't stand up on his principle and say no and try and fight it, and he had the resources to do so. And that's one thing that really bothered me when this crisis hit. So many of the so-called free marketeers and the big businessmen just rolled over and had their hand out.
Well, that's absolutely true. When I say that...
Were they scared? I don't know. Maybe they were threatened, but they could have fought at some type of fight, and they didn't.
Well, threatened by what? I mean, threatened by not having as much money as they wanted before.
Possibly.
I mean, if you look at what happened, and some of this goes back, one of the key developments, and I think 1978 is a key year in this in a number of ways. For one thing, in 1978, that's when Proposition 13 was passed in California. And California is you know, you mentioned, does this make you a populist when you said something earlier, but I often think of the progressives who pushed for the initiative and referendum and how they must be rolling in their graves over recent decades at the way this has been used. But even if you are somewhat of a populist, there's such a thing as too much direct democracy. Because, and California just shows this, they're the cutting edge of most things in the country in recent decades, and that anti-tax movement rolled from there in 1978, the idea of cutting back government and cutting back taxes. And what has happened in California is that increasingly, instead of legislation being passed, they do it through referenda.
Yeah.
And the idea is that's supposed to let the people decide directly, reduce the power of special interests. It doesn't reduce the power of special interests because the special interests pay for ads, you know, no 147 or whatever, and try to get it that way. But of course what people do when they are left to make the decisions is they always vote to lower their taxes and they vote in favor of spending programs. And the result of that is the absolute bankruptcy in California right now. So that's one thing in 1978. There was also a little noticed court case at the time which struck down the idea that maximum interest rate laws, usury laws in various states applied if a bank was in another state. And the court said, and I think they were on sound ground legally here, they were really expecting, I believe, the federal government to pass a federal usury law. But instead, they said that banks were only governed by whatever state laws they had in the state they were located in. And so South Dakota promptly repealed all such laws. Soon after that, Delaware did. And all the credit card companies rushed to South Dakota and Delaware, basically saying they can do anything they want. And so they create these so-called contracts where there are goes up, I think now sometimes to 20 pages of fine print, which basically says they can do anything they want. You know, they lead customers to believe that they've got an interest rate. It may be variable, but it will be based on the prime rate or something. But if you read all the fine print, it turns out they can do absolutely anything they want. And they have just been absolute bandits throughout this, encouraging people to go deeper into debt and, you know, just robbing people.
And it's a shame to me because here again, as someone who has defended and business people on philosophical grounds, to me that's not what business is about. I mean, you want to make money. I want to make money. I want to make a good profit. I'm not ashamed to say that. But what I witnessed when Wall Street collapsed was just absolutely obscene. I mean, it really was obscene. People took millions and billions of dollars and just got the hell out of Dodge, didn't they? You know?
Yeah, and you know, you're supposed to reward success, and all these people have these golden parachutes. They're getting, you know, millions and millions of dollars when they've run the company into the ground. That's not the way capitalism is supposed to work.
No.